Hey everybody, it's John Brown, the Bandana Gamer, bringing you an epic crossover video. Right now, at your local comic book store or on the website for Tomorrow's Publishing, there's a link below, is issue 111 of Back Issue Magazine. If you don't know, Back Issue Magazine is a magazine devoted to telling the stories of the Bronze Age of comics. This is your late 70s, 80s, and early 90s. Issue 111 is an alternate universe issue, an issue devoted to talking about comics from that period that dealt with alternative realities. Such stories covered are the Hulk Imperfect storyline by Peter David and Alex Ross and Jim Krueger's Earth X. One specific story in there is about Marvel's 2099 line of comics. This was a line of comics that told the story of the Marvel Universe in the year 2099. Now, the continuity's been changed and altered a bit over the years, so whether or not it's actually the future or an alternate timeline or an alternate reality is kind of up for debate. But Marvel launched a line of comics where you saw Spider-Man 2099, Punisher 2099, Doom 2099, and even the X-Men 29, and a bunch of others that told these kind of cyberpunk future stories. Now, the article in here is by yours truly, and what I wanted to do is do a video that kind of was in support of the article. I'm not going to tell you too much about the comic history of 2099, that's in the magazine, but there were and are video games that go along and tell some of these stories as well. So this video is about the history of 2099 in video games. Let's get started. The comic book line was published in the early and mid 90s. As the comic line was being published, there was one attempt at a video game for the Marvel 2099 universe. It was entitled Marvel 2099: One Nation Under Doom. This took its name from a crossover that had occurred in the comics where Dr. Doom became the President of the United States of America. This shifted the status quo of a bunch of the books, such as Punisher 2099 became an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. Now, the game was to be developed by Mindscape and was going to be released for the original PlayStation and Windows 95 computers. It was going to be a 2D action side-scroller. However, the game got canceled due to Mindscape folding because of financial difficulties. However, some demos and some screenshots were released to various video game news outlets. And there were some demos at E3 in the year of 1996. But I haven't been able to confirm the reliability of many of the screenshots I've found online, so I'm not including any of those in this video. But there is information out there on this canceled project. Now, the Marvel 2099 universe, as the comic line winded down, would fade into obscurity for several years. Nothing would actually be done with the line, except for hints there about it being an alternate universe, and every so often a character popping up, mainly Spider-Man 2099, as Spider-Man 2099 had been the most popular creation to come out of the line. In terms of video games, there was no real desire or push to see a 2099 video game brought into fruition. However, the characters and concepts did make appearances as alternate costumes. In the Spider-Man PlayStation games, Spider-Man 2099's costume was an alternate costume that you could dress Spider-Man in. Now, there were a couple of instances of these, especially in the mobile platforms, as that game platform has developed. But one of my favorite alternate costumes to come out of a 2099 character is in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, where Ghost Rider features an alternate costume of Ghost Rider 2099. Ghost Rider has a unique story in the development of the 2099, which is covered in my back issue article. So once again, please check that out. But the very fact that there was enough insight to try and bring Ghost Rider, of all the characters from 2099, into a mainstream game is kind of intriguing and really interesting. And they did a really good job presenting that character as an alternate take. However, even as time progressed, there would be a push back to 2099 and games set in the 2099 universe would come about. Now, all of the games that would later be developed that featured 2099 in a prominent role would center around Spider-Man 2099. As I said, he was the most popular character coming out of the line of comics. Now, the first game that to feature the 2099 universe in a prominent way was Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. This game was released in 2010 and was released on the Nintendo DS, PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, Wii, and eventually Windows. All of the main console releases were 3D beat-em-up-esque style games with Spider-Man's mechanics, and the DS was more of a Metroidvania 2D side-scroller. Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions focuses on a tablet being broken into pieces, containing massive amounts of power, and being spread out through 4 dimensions. This causes Madam Web to seek out the help of 4 Spider-Men. They are the Amazing Spider-Man from the Marvel 616 universe, Ultimate Spider-Man, which to differentiate the Ultimate Spider-Man from his amazing counterpart, they put Ultimate Spider-Man back in the symbiote black costume. Spider-Man Noir, which is a Spider-Man set in the 1940s and takes on a noir style storytelling. Character was recently featured in the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse movie, played by Nicolas Cage. And of course, the man we're all gathered around to talk about today, Spider-Man 2099. Now, an interesting thing to note about this game is that the story was written by Dan Slott. Dan Slott is a prominent comic book writer, and actually, back in 2018, he wrapped an over a decade-long run on the Amazing Spider-Man comic. And an interesting note, in 2014, Dan Slott started and wrote a very epic storyline called Spider-Verse, which featured Spider-Mans from alternate universes coming together with one purpose. It's very interesting to note that this game actually predates that by over 4 years. So Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions is actually kind of the first echoings of a Spider-Verse. Now, one of the things I really, really love about this game is the love for the Spider-Man character that was clearly at its heart in the development of this game by Beenox Studios. And that love is clearly shown in the cast. The 4 main Spider-Man are all voiced by people who had connections to the Spider-Man character. The Amazing Spider-Man is voiced by Doogie Howser and How I Met Your Mother alumni, Neil Patrick Harris. Now, Neil Patrick Harris also had his turn at voicing Spider-Man in the MTV the Spider-Man animated series that came out following the first Tobey Maguire movie. Now, while the series isn't loved, it is a fairly interesting series in that it was one of the first to use completely computer animated graphics to produce the story. And it had a very interesting cel-shaded look to it. Now, Christopher Daniel Bryan plays Spider-Man Noir and was originally attached as the Spider-Man from the 1994 animated Spider-Man TV series. This is the one that went alongside the X-Men animated show on Fox Networks, and it's kind of the one that I'm the most familiar with in that was prominent while I grew up. Josh Keaton would play the Ultimate Spider-Man, and he was the voice of the Spectacular Spider-Man from the 2008 beloved animated series. He also would go on to voice Spider-Man in other games such as Marvel Superhero Squad, Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and another one we'll talk about in a little bit. Spider-Man 2099, whose secret identity is Miguel O'Hara, is voiced by none other than Spider-Man legend Dan Gilvezan. Gilvezan is responsible for voicing Spider-Man from the 1980s cartoon Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. This cartoon paired Spider-Man with Bobby Drake, aka Iceman of the X-Men, and an original creation, Firestar, who was also attributed to be an X-Men, but was an original creation for the show. They took on weekly adventures, taking on Spider-Man and other prominent Marvel Universe villains, and occasionally tied in with other Marvel Universe characters, such as Tony Stark was the one who outfitted the Teens Crime Lab, and the X-Men did a couple of guest appearances on the show. This is a fun little nostalgic pull, because as soon as you hear Spider-Man 2099 talk, you connect the voice with Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Now, while it seems a little odd to choose Spider-Man 2099 for this voice, it still once again speaks to the amount of love that this developer gave to this game and had for the overall Spider-Man concept. All in all, I've enjoyed my playthrough of this game and loved how it touched on all these different Spider-Man universes, and is the foundational point for a very big moment in Spider-Man's history, as it would later serve as the inspiration for Spider-Verse and the new hit movie Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. This game was fairly well received, receiving B+ reviews from many reviewers at the time, and sold fairly well, enough that it would produce a sequel that would then focus even more on the 2099 universe. In the next year, 2011, Activision would have Beenox follow up their success in Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions with Spider-Man Edge of Time. This time, we would only get 2 Spider-Men, but they would be working in tandem to help fight the evil company Alchemax from altering and destroying the future. The story has Spider-Man 2099 reaching across time to an altered universe where Amazing Spider-Man is trying to prevent the deaths of his loved ones. An interesting thing to note about this one is the story is penned by Peter David. Peter David is the creator of Spider-Man 2099. He was the first writer to come onto the Spider-Man 2099 book, and would later be charged with a new volume of Spider 2099 that would spin out of the success of Dan Slott's Spider-Verse. Peter David is kind of considered the ultimate Spider-Man 2099 writer, and it's interesting that he got to craft this story. The game would go on to receive more mediocre reviews than its predecessor, and it would not see the success in terms of sales that Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. However, the game concept is cool and the combat is fairly fluid. It's a fun one to pick up. A few more years before we saw another prominent video game release featuring the 2099 characters. But the next release would be what I consider the most mainstream game to have Marvel 2099 in a prominent place. And that game is Marvel Super Heroes 2. The game was released in 2017, developed by Traveler's Tales and published by Warner Brothers Interactive. It was released for the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Nintendo Switch, Microsoft Windows, and the Mac OS. The game features a plethora of Marvel characters and has a humongous roster to unlock, and has the most amount of playable characters from the 2099 universe of any game. And featured prominently on the cover is Spider-Man 2099 himself. The story is once again written by a comic book legend in Kurt Busiek. Kurt Busiek is known for his creator-owned series Astro City, and has had runs on Superman and the Avengers and other comics, and is also widely recognized for his groundbreaking story, Marvels. The game features Spider-Man 2099 as a playable character, Captain America 2099 as a playable character, Venom 2099, Hulk 2099, and a couple others from the 2099 universe. But even more interestingly is that Nueva York, the setting for the Marvel 2099 universe, is a playable level and fully explorable in free roam play. This game has brought Spider-Man 2099 to a whole new generation of video game players, as the Lego Marvel games and all the Lego games are geared at younger players. In this, they have introduced the 2099 world to a whole new crop of comic and video game fans, ensuring that once more these characters will be seen for more generations to come. That brings us to our conclusion of a look at the 2099 video games. If you're interested in more history on the 2099 universe, I implore you to check out Back Issue 111. Like I said, it's available at your local comic book store and from Tomorrow's Publishing. I had a blast making this video, and I had a blast writing the article. The article features several interviews with Peter David, the creator of Spider-Man, Carl Kessel, the writer of Fantastic Four 2099, and several others. It's an awesome read, as well as the entirety of Back Issue 111, telling the story of alternate universes in the Bronze Age. Well, I will catch y'all in the next one. Peace until then, my friends.